All right, Katie. Haley. Blake.
If I want, yeah. So that's why I usually get it out.
Alyssa.
Right here.
Lizzie. Dylan.
I have 2 wrong.
All right, you just that's not fatal. That's not fatal.
Thank you.
You got it. And Dylan. All right.
Now I didn't have to pass.
Happy Monday. We are starting new material today. I wanted to Hey guys, let's get somewhere quietly, please. All right. Anyway, we're going to start new material today. We're going to talk about Chapter 7. Now, a quick announcement. I've been kind of looking at the ebook readings for the last few chapters, and we've got 9 students in class, and I'm seeing 3, 4, and 5 last few weeks doing the readings for the assigned chapters. I'm hoping that is because a number of you are using a hard copy of a text. If that's the case, I'm not going to see the fact that you're doing the ebook reading. But if 3 out of 9 are doing the reading and you're all accessing your textbook materials by a computer, that's not a good thing. I know I issued a few hard copies of the books out. These readings are not only required, they are absolutely necessary to kind of help you understand the material that we lecture on during the course of the class period. So try to make sure that your readings are finished before the Monday in which we do the material. So today we're going to start Chapter 7, the Early Republic. You should have your reading, and if it's not done, you should be on your way toward finishing it before the end of the day tomorrow. All right? Because what's going to happen, we're going to do notes, we're going to do a little lecture, and if you've done the reading ahead of time, it's going to make comprehending the material a lot, I think, easier. Now, with that in mind, your quizzes, everybody did a fine job on Friday, so you know your vocab. You're clearly looking at your vocab words. I don't think we had a score below 86 on the quiz, so you're doing fine on that front. We will be having a test on Chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 once we finish with Chapter 8 in a couple of weeks. So just be on the lookout. There will be like a unit test on Chapters 5 through 8, and that's going to follow your Regents format. And this week we're also going to start talking about how the Regents is going to be presented. The format, the blueprint for the Regents. The Regents exam consists of 3 parts. Multiple choice, 28 questions, some short answer questions on historical documents, and there's a civic literacy essay toward the end of the assignment. So I don't want to bombard you with a lot on the Regents today, but we're going to start looking this week at Regents preparation and how we're going to go about getting prepared for the Regents. And the best way to do that is to take a look at how the exam is laid out. And I have a handout that I'll give you Thursday to look at. All right, Thursday's class, you guys will be in the library. Thursday, I will not be here after 1:30. I have to leave for another doctor's appointment, so you guys will be, Mrs. T will not be here on Thursday. You guys will definitely be in the library Thursday. I know there's some confusion last week. Did you guys come to class, or did you get the memo that you should have came here instead of the library?
I was waiting before.
Okay, so you will definitely be at the library Thursday, unless my appointment cancels, and I don't think that's going to happen. Today, all right, this week you got a vocab quiz on Friday in class and an inquisitive assignment due Friday on Chapter 7. We're going to use PowerPoints this week, a Google slideshow again. Next week, Chapter 8, we'll probably get back to the older format where I give you a copy of the packet. But for today, I shared what we're going to be working on today with you electronically. We're going to begin looking at the third presidency and the administration of Thomas Jefferson. Okay? Jefferson will be our third president. He will be elected in 1800. Okay? He will be president number 3, and he will be the first president who will not be a Federalist. which you might imagine from what we've talked about, the differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The first president who's not a Federalist is going to have quite a different outlook both on what the country should look like and what government should look like. What might you surmise about Jefferson if he's an anti-federalist, if he's a Southern slave owner, if he is a wealthy planter? What might you surmise about him coming from Virginia when he becomes president? What point of view might he be coming from, Palin? He clearly does not want to get rid of slavery. He's a slave owner. He will own slaves until his death. Although, ironically, Jefferson will also talk a lot in his lifetime. While owning slaves, Jefferson will talk about the morality of owning slaves. Jefferson, I think, I might have mentioned this earlier in the year, but Jefferson, one of his most famous quotations on the issue of slavery, he compared slavery to trying to hold a wolf by its ears. You can imagine a wolf in your hand being held by the ears. Jefferson said slavery is kind of like holding a wolf by the ears. You're afraid to hold on to it, and you're afraid to let it go. Comparing slavery, holding a wolf by the ears. You're afraid to hold on to it, and at the same time you're afraid of letting it go. What might Jefferson have been saying at being afraid to hold on to it is an acknowledgement that at least part of Jefferson acknowledges that slavery might be what? Wrong. Being afraid to let it go might acknowledge on Jefferson's part what? Listen. Well, or worse in Jefferson's view, Alyssa said if you give them too much freedom, they might try to run away. But Jefferson believed that if slaves were freed all at once, in the American South, Jefferson feared two things. One, the collapse of the Southern economy, and two, as was a huge fear among white Southerners, whether they owned slaves or not, what would be a concern among white Southerners if slaves were freed? Yeah, revenge, rebellion, payback. That was a huge, huge concern. Whether it was imagined or not, it's what white Southerners felt, that if slaves were freed, and this is why slaves would never really be welcome in the armed forces. Either they would fight during the Revolution after Washington needed them to boost the manpower, but even during the Civil War, everybody says, Mr. Farley, why don't Southerners who own slaves allow their slaves to become soldiers to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War? And one, slaves would probably not be very enthusiastic fighting to maintain, to preserve an institution that keeps them in bondage. But two, the more practical reason that slaves were not allowed to fight is why? Why would slaves not be allowed to be soldiers for the Confederacy during the American Civil War? No, not even that, Palin.
Maybe go sabotage?
What?
Maybe go sabotage? Like not.
Well, if you're going to be a soldier, for the Confederacy, soldiers have to be issued what to fight? Okay, why would Southern slaveholders be reluctant to issue guns to slaves? Yeah, yeah. There were very strict codes about slaves and owning weapons, and to arm a slave to fight. Now, granted, the Confederacy they'll need bodies, they'll need manpower to fight the war, but arming slaves was never really an option for that reason, for those reasons. All right, let's look at Jefferson and his presidency. Third presidency, elected in 1800. I've got a short video here on impressment that I want to share with you, and that's how we'll start today. Impressment, which we said was the practice of what? Who remembers from last week? Impressment. Haley. British soldiers, British sailors, French sailors, more often though British, would impress American merchant seamen, American sailors. What did impress mean?
Isn't that where the British would
Capture American ships, seize the cargoes, and force American merchant seamen to basically join the British Navy. Okay, this is going to be one of the main causes of the War of 1812. Let's take a look at what our author said.
Imagine yourself a sailor on a British warship in the early 19th century. Great Britain is locked into a war for survival with Napoleonic France, and it had hundreds of warships on the high seas. That required thousands of sailors, many of whom did not volunteer for service but had been forced into service because of the desperate war. Over time, a growing number of those British sailors discovered that Americans were paying their sailors more than the British government was. And America was not involved in the war. It was a neutral. So for those reasons, a growing number of British sailors deserted and joined American ships, both warships and merchant ships. Desperate for sailors, the British Navy began stopping American ships and confiscating sailors, claiming that they were British citizens, but they really didn't bother to check to make sure. So this issue of impressing sailors, as it was called, became one of the primary reasons for the United States making the decision in 1812 to declare war against Great Britain.
So that's like an overview video that's kind of introduces us to this topic. Before we get to the War of 1812, though, we've got to look at the Jefferson administration, which is going to be the topic of our discussion this week. All right, so Jefferson, he is our third president. He will serve from 1801 to 1809. He will take office in March of 1801. He will be elected to 2 terms. A lot's going to happen in his 2 terms in office. A lot is going to happen that's going to determine the outcome of the United States for generations, for decades moving forward. His administration is going to mark significant changes in politics and expansion. We're going to talk about American politics and expansion. America is going to grow larger during Jefferson's administration, primarily, but not exclusively, but primarily due to America purchasing a large tract of land between the Appalachian Mountains and between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. That tract of land will be known as what's called the Louisiana Purchase. The United States will double in size while on his watch. Let's take a look at some of the key aspects of President Thomas Jefferson. And he has a lot of things going for him that kind of make him an interesting topic to look at as a president. As I said, he was the first non-federalist to be elected president. Okay, he will be a member of the Republican Party, what was then called the Democratic-Republicans, but we're going to short it to Republicans. He emphasized, this is important in contrast to the Federalists, he emphasized a smaller government and plain living. He did not want the size of government to grow. He wanted to shrink the size and the scope of the government, consistent with the idea that the state should have more what? Power. Jefferson wanted to shrink the size of the government, and he wanted to make sure that the federal government was not intrusive. He wanted to make sure that the federal government was not micromanaging or playing too big a role in the lives of everyday Americans. In addition, being a Virginian and being a planter, he promoted an agricultural society over industrialization. His arch rival politically is going to be Alexander Hamilton. They saw the United States in 2 completely different ways. Hamilton saw the United States as a growing and a blossoming industrial power, a financial power, a manufacturing power. Jefferson, as a planter, promoted agricultural society over industrialization. And he advocated also, not a surprise here, for reducing government expenditures. He cut the federal payroll dramatically when he served as president, and that was his belief that the federal government should not be too big where it would interfere with the lives and interfere or curtail the rights of American citizens and in states. I have a question before we watch the video on his revolution, and I got revolution in quotations. I've described Jefferson as a planter. how does that term differ from the term farmer? And there is, during this period, a distinct difference. What determined who was a planter and what determined who was a farmer? Yeah. Yeah. Planters were the people who owned the plantation, people who owned large tracts of land, and farmers were people who worked it. Jefferson was a planter. He was a very, very well-educated and very wealthy slaveholder who saw agriculture as the future of America. He is going to introduce some pretty unique changes to American political culture. He is going to, for example, Jefferson was the president that is going to really make common the practice of shaking hands upon meeting someone. When you met George Washington or when you met John Adams, you typically, as a show of respect, would bow before them to kind of honor and to show respect. Well, with Jefferson, Jefferson was much more, I don't know, to use the phrase we used to say, he was kind of more laid back. He was kind of chill. He wasn't into formality. He wasn't into big soirees and dances and presidential balls, and that wasn't his thing. He advocated for a simple way of life as an agricultural society. And that agricultural society that he's going to want to push is going to come into conflict with the northeastern part of the country, which is going to be filled with more federalists and more factories and more people who want to focus on the industrial might of the new country. All right, let's take a look at our video on Jefferson's Revolution.
The election of 1800 was a revolution, according to Thomas Jefferson. He and the Republicans gained power for the first time. And Jefferson, as president, systematically set about reversing a number of the developments that the Federalists, under George Washington and John Adams, had created during the 1790s. Including among those changes was the abolition of the whiskey tax, which was a tax placed on farmers who grew grain to produce whiskey. And Jefferson, as someone who...
Real quick thing, if you get an opportunity, I know a few of you have done it, but late Friday I posted a short and puzzle video clip on your Google Stream. If you haven't watched it yet, just get it completed for tomorrow's class. It's a 4.5-minute video on the Whiskey Rebellion, which resulted in Washington having to basically bring an army of about 12,000 men into western Pennsylvania to kind of put to rest a rebellion over the whiskey tax. All right?
very much cherished the tradition of farming and agriculture in the United States, on behalf of the farmers who resented very much the whiskey tax, abolished it. In addition, it was Jefferson whose curiosity about the far west created what was called the Lewis and Clark Expedition, whereby a group of explorers started out from St. Louis and went across the far west all the way to the Pacific coast, providing the first detailed information and scientific specimens about this.
So that Lewis and Clark expedition was basically the expedition that Jefferson authorized for them to go out, Lewis and Clark and their Native American guide, Sacagawea. Jefferson authorized that as a way of inspecting the Louisiana Purchase, which he had just made in 1803. He had a chance to double the size of the United States with the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. Jefferson buys the Louisiana Territory without knowing a heck of a lot about it, and after he buys it and doubles the size of the country, he thought it would be a good idea, and he was brilliant to do this, to send people out on an expedition to explore what we had just purchased. So that's the purpose of the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Mysterious region known as the West. Of course, that was especially important because Jefferson was also the president who secured what was called the Louisiana Purchase, the acquisition of a vast area of territory west of the Mississippi River from France for a very modest price. And of course, acquiring that much territory came to transform the development of America as a truly transcontinental nation. Jefferson's presidency also witnessed a growing trend among the states to lower the property requirements for voting. Prior to that, you had to have a certain amount of personal wealth in order to vote as a citizen. Well, Jefferson very much supported this democratization of American politics, and in part, that's what represented the Jeffersonian Revolution.
That's important, ladies and gents. Just make sure you have a feel for exactly what he was just describing. This democratization. Okay, that is a 25-cent word. I'm going to jot that down so you can see it. Democratization. All right? Democratization. D-E-M-O. Democratization basically is the expanding of voting rights to more people, lessening the requirement that people had to now own property to vote. When our country was first established, and certainly during the colonial era, most of the 13 states that where voting was allowed for white Americans, in order to vote, you had to be a white male property owner over the age of 21, and in some states, you had to practice a certain what? Religion. Well, Jefferson is going to be the president. On his watch, we're going to start to see a shrinking of those property ownership requirements. Now, don't misconstrue that to think that it's going to expand suffrage to all groups. It will not expand voting rights to all groups. It will not, for example, we won't see African Americans earn the suffrage rights, at least black males will not earn the suffrage rights until the 1860s. We will not see women earn suffrage rights in America until 1920. But Jefferson, on his watch as president, we will start to see a loosening or a lessening of the property ownership requirements in order for people to vote. And that's very significant. That's very significant. All right? All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, let's talk about his economic policies. I'm going to go kind of quick because I want to get through our slide today. But first thing he's going to do, he's going to repeal the whiskey tax. Again, not to overwhelm you with the details on this, but repealing the whiskey tax. Remember, how is whiskey made? Do I have any farmers in here? Whiskey is made from grain alcohol. It's made from grain. And the whiskey tax would be a direct assault on farmers who sold whiskey, and it was very, very popular. Americans of all ages and all genders drank whiskey. The repealing of the whiskey tax would cater to Jefferson's alignment with agricultural groups. Okay, he's helping the farmers that he feels are the vital element of America by lessening their tax burden. So one of his economic policies is going to repeal the whiskey tax. He maintained much of Hamilton's Federalist economic program, despite being arch rivals with Hamilton, and despite not seeing the world and the United States in the same way that Hamilton saw it, he did maintain much of Hamilton's Federalist economic program, and that is because politically, Jefferson understood that he is not just the president of rural farmers in Virginia. He is the president of both farmers in Virginia and business owners and merchants and Federalists in the northern states. So in a way, he holds on to much of Hamilton's, but he does this because it's necessary for him to do that politically. He also, and this is a biggie, his goal with cutting spending and cutting taxes and shrinking the military and shrinking the Army and the Navy, his goal is to reduce the nation's debt, to continue to keep America's debt low, and to reduce it, eliminate it entirely. And one of the ways you're going to do that, one of the ways you reduce your debt as a nation, you can do it a couple of ways. You can increase taxes, so you got more revenue coming in, and Jefferson didn't want to do that, or you can cut your spending. So what he's going to focus on is cutting spending to reduce the nation's national debt. Dylan.
The nation's always been in debt, right?
Our nation?
Yes.
There have been times where we have temporarily been out of debt, and sadly, once that occurs, once, and this is not just the United States, it sounds like I'm criticizing just the U.S., but typically what will happen once a country is out of debt or their debt is eliminated, they will oftentimes revert back to the same type of policies and programs that they had in effect that caused the debt to explode in the first place. So there have been times the United States has been out of debt. Oftentimes, well, I don't want to get too ahead of us, but yes, to answer your question, there are times that the United States has been debt-free, but it certainly has not been for extended generations. We are right now, does anybody want to take a guess right now as to how much debt the United States is in right now, our national debt?
3 trillion?
How many?
3 trillion?
You say 3 trillion, okay, with a T. Okay, Lizzie, what do you say? How many? Yeah, it is absolutely in the trillions. There's a running clock that shows the national debt in dollar signs. I'm guessing right now the national debt is somewhere upwards of 32 or 33 trillion dollars. And here's a scary thought. Your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, unless something is done about it, are going to be paying that debt. And the only way that debt's going to be paid off is if one or two things happen. One, the United States reins in and controls its spending, or two, if the United States taxes Americans into oblivion, which hopefully won't happen. Scientists, financial, yeah.
Who is the U.S. in debt with?
Well, we owe money to a lot of our federal social welfare programs have put us in debt. A lot of our debt is owed to China, which is frightening because right now China is one of our largest enemies in the world. We owe debt to European nations. So I was just going to say one of the scariest statistics I think I've ever come across as a history teacher is if the national debt had to be paid today, it would take about $60,000 or $70,000 from every American to pay off our national debt. And you just do the math. I mean, there's about 330 million people in the U.S. right now. $70,000 per person, not per family, not per household, but per person. That gives you an idea of how deeply our nation is in debt. And what's happening now is that our debt right now, we are barely able to make payments on the interest as a nation. Yeah.
Do you know what they're trying to do to eliminate the debt right now?
Not a hell of a lot. Okay, government right now is doing actually probably the worst possible thing to reduce our debt. They continue to print money. They continue to print money to pay for programs that Americans simply cannot afford right now. What has to happen in order for a country, and again, this is not just the United States, but this applies economically for anywhere. In order for a country to start to satisfy its debt obligations, it has to start to control its spending. Okay? If a country does not control its spending, its debt problem is never going to solve itself. Because right now, there is no way possible on earth the United States can satisfy its debt obligations by taxing Americans. There's simply not enough there's not enough wealth that is in existence that it can tax its way out of the problem. So taxation is not the way to solve our debt crisis. We have to reduce our spending, and we have to generate revenue. Okay? We have to generate revenue. All right? More on that as we get closer to the 20th century and when we get in the second half of the year. But for now, let's talk about Jefferson's stressing American simplicity or Republican simplicity. Jefferson advocated, again, we're talking about Jefferson's presidency, we're talking broad strokes here, broad brush strokes. He wanted a simpler, less aristocratic society. He did not want, in other words, aristocratic society means under Washington and under Adams, most Americans, they worshipped their political leaders. They almost, Washington wouldn't like this, and Adams probably liked it more, but Washington certainly did. There was an attitude among many Americans that Washington was kind of like a king, and that he was not very approachable, and that he was kind of, while our first president and widely respected and well loved by a lot of Americans, there was still an attitude that he was kind of above everybody else. Well, Jefferson is going to start to make that less of an issue with a Republican simplicity. He reduced the size of the military and government, and he encouraged frugality and modesty in public life. Frugality. Anybody want to take a stab at the meaning of that word? If you are frugal, you are what? My grandma and grandpa said, Christian, you have to grow up to be frugal. And it's been good advice because I've tried to keep it. Frugal, what? Exactly. Smart with your money. Be frugal. Don't piss away your money on stuff you don't need. Store money, put money away so you have it if you need it for a rainy day. And also, modesty. Jefferson, handshaker, as I mentioned. Jefferson was a very approachable. Yeah, he was a founding father. Yeah, he had a reputation as being kind of a little bit of a aloof or arrogant. But generally speaking, he is going to stress modesty, and that's consistent with farmers. There's an old phrase, and I know I mentioned this to you guys and girls in 7th grade. What does this mean? If someone tells you that somebody is down to earth, what are they saying about a person? Palin. Genuine, yeah, good word. Okay, down to earth. Where do you think that phrase comes from? Farmers who are down on their hands and knees working the earth. Yeah, hardworking people. Didn't mean to spit on you. Hardworking people down on their hands and knees, and that's the kind of America that Jefferson valued and that Jefferson imagined for the new country, for the young country. All right. Let's continue. Let's look at the Louisiana Purchase. Again, broad strokes, Jefferson's presidency. He acquired from France in 1803 for $15 million in Louisiana territory. Look at the green portion of the map, okay? From the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, okay? Double the size of the United States, and it opened vast territories for American settlers. And Native Americans, they were an afterthought largely to Jefferson's presidency. Sadly, Jefferson and his presidency, and there's good and bad with every president. One of the downsides of Jefferson's historically is his total indifference and mistreatment of Native Americans, constantly forcing them to move westward or southward off of their territories, constantly reneging on agreements and treaties that were established. Jefferson's policy toward Native Americans is basically going to be one of Native Americans need to get the hell out of the way for American settlers as they move west. Okay? For American settlers as they move west. Louisiana Purchase, what do we got here?
It was described by one observer at the time as
the most significant event to our country since the Declaration of Independence.
It involved a largely uninhabited land of tall grass prairie and mountains, but in one fell swoop it doubled the size of the United States, catapulting the fledgling nation into a world power. It was the Louisiana Purchase. In January of 1803, wishing to secure safe and open navigation from the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to the Atlantic Ocean, President Jefferson sent James Monroe to join Robert Livingston in Paris with orders to negotiate for the purchase of New Orleans. The year before, the Spanish official in charge of the port of New Orleans had stopped the right of deposit, preventing American farmers from warehousing their produce and goods in New Orleans for transshipment to the Atlantic. President Jefferson declared,
"It is New Orleans through which the produce of 3/8 of our territory must pass to market. France, placing herself on that door, assumes to us an attitude of defiance."
Ceded in 1762 to Spain, French Louisiana was returned to France in 1800 by the Treaty of Ile-de-France. Napoleon Bonaparte had planned the French Empire in the New World with its center at New Orleans. But by 1803 his plans had been shattered. A large army he sent to the Caribbean island of Santo Domingo was destroyed by revolt and yellow fever. Threatened with a new war in Europe, Napoleon suddenly offered the entire territory of Louisiana for sale.
I renounce Louisiana. It is not only New Orleans that I will cede, it is the whole colony without reservation.
So I want to stop at that point in the video. I'll link that tonight. You can finish it. But the long and the short of it is Jefferson had he had sent a diplomat to France to purchase the city of New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi. And the reason Jefferson wants to buy New Orleans is because we need control. The United States needed control of the river to allow farm goods to go up and down the river to come out for shipping to the Atlantic. And when he gets to France and makes the offer to buy New Orleans, the French diplomat says, wait a second here. We're cash-strapped. We need money. We're fighting wars in Europe, and our country needs money. So rather than sell New Orleans, France offers to sell the whole Louisiana territory, this whole green area here, for about $15 million, which sounds like a lot, but it's about 2 cents an acre. 2 cents an acre. And Jefferson, after he picked his jaw up off the table, said, buy the land. Buy the land. We don't know what's on it. We don't care what's on it. Just buy the land. Jefferson saw the opportunity, and with that purchase, it had to be approved by the Senate, but with that purchase, it doubled the size of the U.S. Louisiana Purchase. Yeah.
How much is that like today?
I tell you what, if you were to put a dollar amount on this land today, it hundreds of trillions of dollars. I mean, it's ungodly sum of money. And the United States got a bargain. They got a bargain. 15 million was, it's a lot of money, but for 2 or 3 cents an acre of land, by the way, is about half the size of our parking lot. So the parking lot from elementary to high school would be about 2 acres. We got millions of acres for 2 cents an acre. Just a wonderful, wonderful deal. Too good to be true. Too good to be true. And then Jefferson's next move is to send Lewis and Clark out on an expedition. I'm not going to play this video clip in class, but if you want, you're able to watch it tonight. It's a bell ringer video on this, so it'll give you more information. But Lewis and Clark was basically commissioned. It was a military expedition sanctioned by Jefferson to basically go out and explore the Louisiana Purchase. It's like buying a car and taking the test drive after you've bought the vehicle. Most people, when they buy a car, they test drive it first, and then they buy the car. Jefferson bought the land and then sent 2 very equipped and accomplished men, William Clark and Meriwether Lewis, to explore the territory. It lasted from 1804 to 1806, and it basically provided a wealth of information about those western lands. They went all the way from St. Louis in the east to the Pacific coast in the west, and then they doubled back. It took about 2.5 years. They were guided by a 16-year-old Native American woman named Sacagawea, who gave birth on the expedition to a newborn while leading a trip of 50 men. She's guiding them across the Rockies. She's helping them get west. She's helping them secure horses from her tribe. This is a pretty important event in our nation's history, the Lewis and Clark expedition, which resulted in maps and charts being created. It basically helped the United States realize just what the heck they had purchased with the Louisiana Purchase. And sadly, with the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark expedition, that will open up the West to further exploration, which is going to mean Native Americans are going to be displaced even more after the Lewis and Clark expedition returns in 1806. So I put a bell ringer video. It's about a 5-minute clip, and you can watch that on your PowerPoint. I have shared the PowerPoint with you, so you all should have it.
Today we're looking at the Lewis and Clark expedition. Bellringer.com.
I don't charge extra for this, but I am going to be going on a Lewis and Clark cruise this summer. I'm going to be taking a cruise ship, a paddle boat, that's basically going to follow a long part of the path of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So looking forward to that. I'll report back next year when I go. This is one of my friends. This is Jared. He creates these bell ringer videos. He's from Illinois. It's a pretty cool little video on the expedition. He actually created this video while he was touring the Lewis and Clark site as well. We'll pick up on that topic tomorrow.